This is a complete guide to using OpenAI Codex. By the end of the video, you'll know how to use Codex like a professional developer, putting you ahead of most other people using this tool. Codex is a phenomenal tool for software engineering. The desktop app in particular allows you to work on multiple different projects and tasks at the same time. We're going to be covering setup and permissions, how to use the desktop app in the CLI, how to use skills and plugins, and I'll also show you a live demo of my own workflow when using Codex on a real project. All of the resources in the video are going to be free in the description below, so let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is run this command. Everything looks like it's correctly installed now. So what we can do is go ahead and type Codex, which will start up the CLI. So you can see here we've got a bunch of information about the model that we're using. So GPT 5.5 just launched at the time of recording, and so we can use that model. We're on the high reasoning setting and we can change the model. We'll talk about all of this in a second. So the first thing to do is type the / key. So if you type /, you bring up a bunch of different commands, and there's a couple that are worth knowing. We're going to spend a little bit of time in the CLI, and then we're going to jump over to the desktop app. So the first thing you can change is the model. I always recommend just using the best model. I don't tend to change the model very often. You can use the mini models if you want. These are smaller and in theory more cost efficient, but I'm always just using the latest model. And then you can also set the reasoning level as well. So with reasoning, the higher the reasoning level, the more the model is going to think, and the better the result in theory. Not always true, but I normally stay between medium and high reasoning. I'm going to keep it on high, extra high if you're doing something particularly complex. There are a few other useful commands to know in the CLI. If you type status line, you can customize various things about the CLI. So for example, if you want to see the Git branch, you can actually toggle this on or off. So if you look down the bottom of the window here, you can see this toggling on or off. You can set a bunch of other things like your context limits and things like that if you want to show those on the CLI. So that's useful to know. The other command you can run is the fast command. This will toggle the fast mode on or off. Essentially, this will have faster inference, so you'll get responses more quickly, but it will use more of your usage. So I believe it's 1.5 times faster, but it will use twice as many tokens, essentially. So your limits will get burned quicker. If you type in /status, you can see some information about the limits you have available. You can see here I've only got 53% of my weekly limit left. You can see when the limits reset. You can also see that I'm using the ChatGPT Plus plan. There are a few other things worth knowing. For example, the skills command allows you to toggle skills on or off. So firstly, you can just list out the skills you have available. You'll notice this $ symbol, which is really useful to know. If you type $, then you can bring up any skill. It's like an alias for your skills. So for example, I have a planning skill, and I can just type $plan to bring up that skill. And you can also reference it when you're talking to the model. You can say, use the $plan skill to do X. So you can also reference that way. But you can toggle skills on or off. So if you take a look here, if you go to enable or disable skills, there are a bunch of things configured. I like to keep everything quite minimal, so I often disable things that I'm not using. I don't often use these skills, so I'll just turn them off. A really important thing to know about Codex is there are different sessions or conversations. So right now we're talking to the model, but you might find you've had previous conversations. If you think about ChatGPT, you often have multiple conversations ongoing at the same time. And so the way you start a new conversation is to type /new, and this will start a brand new conversation. You can also go to the following command, resume, and that will bring up all of your other conversations. So you can switch back and forth between different conversations. So this is just a really important thing to know because often you will have multiple conversations ongoing at the same time. You can use the /compact command to compress the context in the current window. There are a bunch of other commands. I won't go through all of them in detail, but do check out these commands. They are super useful. Another thing worth knowing is you can actually run Codex on the CLI in non-interactive mode. This would be useful if you just want to one-shot something or if you want to chain things together. You can actually just run Codex as any other bash tool, essentially. So currently my favorite way to use Codex is through the desktop app. I think this is a really powerful way to work with AI coding models and coding agents. This to me is more powerful than the CLI. I'll show you why in a second. So you can go ahead and download this. I'm running on Mac OS X, so I can just download this as an application. And then once you have it installed, it will look something like this. You can see that we have the Codex application open On the left, we have a projects panel. The idea here is that you can open any project. So if you're working on multiple different things at the same time, you can open a project. A project is basically just a folder somewhere. So for example, I'm working on an application over here. I'm working on a client project here. I've got some personal projects down here. And it's very easy to jump between all of them. And honestly, this is why I love the Codex app. Although I'm very confident in the CLI and the terminal, I just prefer this experience. If you're working on multiple things, jumping between terminal tabs and different split windows, it's fine, but it can get a bit messy and a bit confusing. So I really like the simplicity of using this. And so you can also have multiple chats inside a project. So a chat is just how you basically talk to the model. It's like a new session. Over here, you can see that you can actually render websites or visual images, etc., inside the application, which is really nice. So this is an infographic generation SaaS tool that I was building for my own use cases for content. You can see here you can actually render stuff inside the application. So this is looking at the browser, but I can see it from within Codex here. And then I can start a new conversation. If I want to work on a new feature, then I can go ahead and start talking to the project. There are some useful shortcuts that are worth knowing. So if you type Command and B, you can toggle this sidebar on and off if you want to focus a bit more. And you can also type Command Option and B to bring out this right-hand side panel as well. So there are lots of things going on in the UI, and we'll try and talk through some of them. So the first one is the model that we're using. You can see here down here, we're using the GPT 5.5 model, which is at the time of recording, the newest model available. It was just released yesterday. And there's also the reasoning level, which you can configure here as well. And if you remember the fast mode in this CLI, you can also toggle that as well. So this is about 1.5 times faster, but with increased usage of your limit. So another thing to notice is up here, we can also toggle the terminal if you want to bring out a terminal. So this really does feel like it's a full IDE. Although it's a good way of using the agent, you have just so much available inside this application. It's really well designed and really well thought out. So if we go over here, you can see that I have a bunch of things that are ongoing. So if you look at the top here, you can see all of the changes that are being made for this conversation. And this is really, really useful because you can actually go and preview the changes that the agents are making. Unlike if you're in the CLI, for example, it's very difficult to do this. But you can actually go ahead and you can click on some of these things and you can make a comment. So this is kind of like giving a code review back to the agent. You can say, remove this section. You can comment on that. You can go down here and you can say, rename this thing. So you can add comments as you go through the code changes, which is really nice. And then you'll notice they get added here to the context window. So then you can basically say something like, fix these two comments. So it's a really nice way of talking to the model, giving it feedback as you go through making code changes. You can also toggle up here if you want to expand it out and you kind of want to, just go through it in more depth. You can also toggle it up here. You can also edit things or open them in a code editor as well. So everything here is really well designed. It feels like it was designed for real coding work, and it's just a really lovely interface. I really like it. So there are two different modes to know about when we're working with Codex. You can use local, where we're working with inside your current folder or your current file system. There's also a worktree mode where you can create a separate folder. So Git worktrees allow you to basically work on multiple things at the same time without AI agents conflicting with each other. Essentially what happens is you create a different checkout of the code in a different folder, and that allows AI agents to work in their own folders without overwriting each other or getting in the way as they're working on different things at the same time. You can change all of these settings down here. You can see we're working locally. There's also an option to run Codex on the web. This isn't something I do myself, but you can remote execute code and jobs, etc. if you want to run Codex on the web. You can also see down here, we can hand off to a worktree if we want. So we can go ahead and create a new Git worktree. And when you go and check this out, you can see here, there's this little symbol here that indicates we're now in a Git worktree. If you were to go and look at the file system, you would see that we're actually in a separate folder now, so that anything we do in this folder won't affect anything going on in this chat window. So that's kind of really nice. A few of the settings worth knowing about. If you click over here, you can go to the settings menu. There's tons of things you can configure here. I'm not going to go through all of them. As usual, you can configure things like the appearance, if you want to change the theme, etc. Very easy to do. I am using the linear theme. So let's quickly talk about permissions, because I think it's one of the more confusing concepts within Codex. There are different options, and the three settings are the sandbox mode. This is where Codex can run and execute, so what it can read and write. So this is basically controlling what Codex can access on your file system. There's also network access, which is which commands can execute, reach the internet, etc. And the approvals policy is about notification. So if you've used a tool like Claude Code, you get these pop-up dialogues asking you for permission. And there are various different options with the approval policy you can set. So if you want to use the sandbox and you're just doing normal coding, typically you'll want the workspace write option. This allows Codex to read any file on your file system, but it only allows Codex to write to the current folder that you're in, or the current project folder. If Codex needs to write something outside of that folder, it will typically need to ask for permission to do that. So I find this a good default for most things. So workspace write and then approval on request. So this means Codex can write anything inside your current folder, and it can also ask you for permission if it wants to do something outside of the folder. If you want to match the skip permissions, which I do use in Claude Code, obviously many of us find these permission prompts quite annoying. You can match it pretty easy by using sandbox mode dangerful access, which allows Codex to basically do anything on your file system. And you can set the approval policy to never if you want to. This will mean you don't ever get prompted for approval. These two things can be configured here. You can change the approval policy. So if you don't want to get prompted for approval, you can set that to never. And then you can change the sandbox permissions. So the default you're going to want is probably workspace write, which again, Codex can read any file anywhere, but it can only write within your current folder. If you want Codex to write outside of the current folder, you'd need to set it to full access. Once you've done that, you can also see that you have the network access permissions. I'm just going to enable that because I'm totally fine with that. All of these settings are saved in a config.toml file. I'll just quickly show you what that looks like. So if we were to open up the .codex folder, you can see the config.toml file. Here you can see where all of the settings are saved. So these settings are used across the CLI and the desktop app, as far as I'm aware. So if you do want to change something and you like to change configuration, you can actually go and set things here. So you can see here we've got the GPT 5.5 model, high reasoning, and then this is the approval policy we were just talking about. So I've got the approvals to never prompt me for approval, and the sandbox mode, as we discussed, is workspace write, so it can write within inside the project folder. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take you through a demo of how I would typically use Codex day to day, and this will allow us to talk about some of the different concepts that you can use with Codex that might be relevant to your daily work. So what we're going to do, we're going to switch over into VS Code, and I'm going to talk about the agents.md file. So within VS Code, this is a project I'm currently working on, and I can look at the agents.md file over here. This is like a Claude.md if you're familiar with that. So when the agent starts up or when Codex starts up within your project, it's going to read this file and it's going to give the agent context about whatever you're doing. My general guidance here is to keep it really minimal. I always like to keep these files as minimal as possible. Anytime the agent can just dynamically infer something about the project structure, etc., I think it's not worth putting it into the agents.md file. A good example of something you might want to put in this file is, for example, I'm using a project management system called Linear, which I'm connecting into Codex. And in order for Codex to use that tool, it needs to know which project within that application I'm working on. So what I've done here is I've given Codex the guidance that whenever it needs to pull a Linear ticket or a workspace ticket, it needs to use this particular project. And then I've also described the workflow. So we pick up a ticket, we move it to in progress, and then we move it to done when we're finished. And then when we do any git commit messages, we should include the ticket ID in the commit message. So this is an example of a typical agents.md file you might use on your project. So describe what the project is and what it's for. Any references to any documents that the agent should be aware of. For example, here I've got a product specification which describes what we're building. And then also if you have commands that the agent should run, here I've just got a single file with all of the commands in it. And so what we're doing is just telling the agent, if you need to run any commands, like if you need to run testing, just refer to this single command and it will tell you all of the options available to you. So another really useful thing to know about Codex is it has a plugins feature. So if you click on the plugin section, you can see here there's a whole bunch of things you can integrate with. I'm using this system here called Linear, which is a ticket management system, project management system. And if you click into here, you'll see that the plugin is actually made up of two different things. The first one is an MCP server. This is essentially what allows me to talk to Linear, and it allows the agent to communicate, to create tickets and read tickets in the system. And then we also have a skill installed as well, which teaches the agent how to essentially interact with that MCP server and how to interact with Linear. So this is the project management system I'm using. And as you can see, I'm working through a project right now and I have a bunch of tickets to work on. You can see here, I have lots of stuff that I've already completed, but these are the active tickets I'm working on right now. So we can pick up any of these tickets and you can see there's a description of what we should do. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to work through one of these tickets now just to kind of show the workflow. So this ticket is adding a feature to an existing application. The goal here is to add a single data ingest command that will pull in lots of job data. So I'm building a recruitment application where we need to scrape lots of job data essentially from the internet, and then we store that into a database. But currently the commands for doing that are a bit messy. And what we want is a single command to pull data and ingest data. So we're going to have a single command called just ingest. This will run all of the web scrapers, pull in all of the job data, and then save it into a database. So this is what we're going to be building now. So this ticket is GRA 144. So you can see here now the agent has picked up that ticket. And what it's doing, it's going through my usual development workflow. So it's pulled down that ticket, it's read the instructions. So if I go back into my project management system, what you should see is that you can actually see that this ticket should now be in progress. So there you go. You can see the agent has now updated the ticket as it's working through. The reason I like to use systems like this, if you're working on many different tasks at once, it can get very, very confusing without some kind of system to track the status of the things you're doing. So I tend to use these kind of systems as a way of tracking what's going on. So the agent is now working through this ticket and updating everything. So you can see here now Codex has made a plan. So it's working through this task. It's broken this down into a number of discrete steps. So the first thing is to read the ticket. So as we work through this ticket, as we said before, you can actually go ahead and if you click on this panel here, you can see the code changes that are being made. So you can see here the new command runner file that we've created. And then you can see here the job ingest command as well. So we've built a CLI tool to do the ingest logic. So you can go through and review the code changes as Codex is working on the task. This is just really handy. It means you don't have to switch out the application. You can give feedback on anything you want. So for example, if there was anything I wanted to change here, like maybe I wanted to change or remove this command, I could comment on here, which is just super useful. All right, so it looks like we're done. So we've committed the changes and now we should be able to run this. So what we're probably going to do is actually run this command just to sanity check. Before we do, it's worth talking quickly about skills in Codex. So agent skills are an open standard, and they're a way of giving an agent more context about how to do a particular operation. I think of them as standard operating procedures. They're just markdown files which describe how to do a particular task. So I have a bunch of skills for things like code review. So we could go ahead and run the code review skill if we wanted to. So use the review skill to review our changes, look for anything to improve. So we can kick off now a skill. You can see here it's actually linked to the skill, which is quite nice. And so now we're going to review our code changes, see if there's anything we need to improve before we move on to the next step. If you do want to see all of your skills, just like in the CLI, you can type the / command, and then you can also run various commands. So if you type /, you can see a bunch of options that you can run. So you can go through status. You can see here the skills that we have available. So you can run any of these commands directly from the chat window here as well. All right, so you can see here we have one thing to fix. So this is an error that the agent thinks we should fix. One thing I like about Codex is I feel like it does a much better job at getting things correct. One of my frustrations with Claude is that frequently it will finish a task and you'll find so many different bugs and errors in the code. it's been an ongoing frustration for me. So I find that the Codex models are pretty accurate when it comes to doing relatively complex tasks. I really do love these models. I think they're great. I'm not going to think about this too much. I'm just going to go ahead and say, fix this issue. Okay, so now Codex has fixed this issue. So the next thing I want to do is actually just go ahead and run the command. So I'm in the root folder. So in theory, I should be able to type just ingest. Hopefully I've typed this right. And then in theory, I should be able to run the command. Okay, so database URL is required for ingest. Please set database URL. Okay, I need to go and fix that issue. Okay, so we do have Postgres installed, and so I need to go and set up the database because I haven't done this. So we're going to go and create the database. I'm using PostgreSQL as our database. I have it installed locally. Then we're going to export this environment variable so that it knows which database to use, and then we're going to test this out. So let's go ahead and run this. So you can see here, we currently have no job scraped, no company leads. So in theory, when we run the ingest command, we should be able to see the data coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and type just ingest to run the job. And then in theory, this is going to run the scraper to pull in all of the job data. So just to quickly show you what we're doing here, we're running this script, which is a command line script, and it has a bunch of defaults. So this is actually the command we're running, and it's basically executing a job search across different job boards in different areas. We have a bunch of default arguments, but this is essentially the job that we're actually running here. Just while we're waiting for that to complete, one thing I noticed about the scraper, it doesn't seem to be writing to the database as it goes along. So even though the agent's written code that is technically correct, there are things about the behavior I think we might want to adjust. So I'm just going to check on that. So essentially what I'm asking here is whether we should write to the database as we go along. I have a feeling it's writing to the database only at the end, once it's done the final ingest. And so if this is a long running job, it could fail for multiple different reasons. So we don't want to lose all of the job data if it does fail halfway through. We probably want to be writing things and saving them as we go along. So it looks like, yes, we should do that. So we lose all progress if the scraping fails before the final write. So let's go ahead and make that change. So just while we're waiting for that to complete, you can see here, if I go back to my database table, you can see here the scraper was able to successfully pull in all of the data. So these are the jobs that are found within the last 24 hours. So the scraper's done its work, pulled in all of the data and written it to our database. So everything seems to be working correctly. So another nice feature in Codex is the automations feature. So if you click here, you can create automations. And the idea here is you can run basically scheduled jobs. And so there are a couple of really good examples. If you click over here, you can see a bunch of different ideas for how you might use this feature. An example that I have here in the current project I'm working on is a dependency sweep. So it's quite common when you're working on a software project to find that certain dependencies are out of date, or maybe they have insecure code in them. And so this is a job that runs often, and it will basically scan the code base looking for outdated dependencies. I can go and run this now, but I can also schedule it to run every day, every 6 hours and things like that. So this is a useful feature. I don't use it too much, but it is very nice to have for repeated work within your project. What you'll see is as you kick off that automation, you can see a couple of things. So firstly, that we've created a new chat. So you can see that this is running. And then secondly, you can see that this is actually running in a separate work tree. So if you go over here, you can see that this automation can either run locally, so within your current folder, or in an isolated work tree. Isolation is normally a better option for these kind of tasks, but you can obviously go and configure that if you want to. So you can see here now the automation is finished, and it's basically told us there aren't any dependencies to update. You can kind of see how powerful this kind of thing would be. You can have these repeated jobs if there's any scheduled task or any repeated work that you do with inside your project. If there's something you find yourself doing repeatedly, it makes sense to create an automation for it. Even if you're not running this on a schedule, the fact that you can just jump over here and then fire off this automation is super, super useful. You can see here, it's done a good job. It's scanned all of our dependencies and it's referenced the latest versions across various tools and dependencies. So this is super, super useful. So just before we close out this task, let's go ahead and open a pull request. I'm just checking what we need to do. So I've run this smoke test. Everything seems to work fine. Could you make a commit and open a new branch for me to review? And then could you push that branch up to GitHub for me to review the code? So typically when I'm working with Git or GitHub, I tend to use skills. I really like using the agents to manage this entire workflow. There's also a bunch of stuff up here if you want to manage it manually, but I generally prefer just to use the agents to manage my Git workflow. So I have a skill called commit, which will just kind of manage how to write good commit messages, etc. And I'll link to all of these skills if you're interested in the description. But you can see here now the agent has done all the work for us, and we've got a pull request that we can go and review. So this is the ticket we were just working on. So the agent has now created a link to open a pull request. You can see all of the changes here. So this is the ingest command we just built, and you can see here all of the code that is here, and then we can just go ahead and create a pull request. So if you want to use Codex, you are going to need some kind of subscription plan. There are a couple of options here. If you're already using ChatGPT, chances are you already have some kind of subscription. But I'm using the Plus plan, which is $20 a month. You get a lot of leverage. You can get a lot done with just this one plan. I find the limits are very generous. You get access to all of the latest models, and this is probably good enough to get started for most people. If you do want to go deeper on any of these topics, I do run an AI engineering community. Inside the community, you'll find a bunch of courses on agentic coding, covering some of the advanced concepts that we touched upon here, such as spec-driven development. There's also courses on system design and building AI systems. So if you do want to build and sell AI systems and software systems, this is a great community. We have weekly meetups, and we also have live sessions and workshops that you can check out. Just to let you know, everything we're talking about here is going to be in the documentation. You can get access to sample files, etc. So for the agents.md, for example, I put a reference file here that I'm using myself just to kind of, if you want a reference. And then the same thing for the config file as well. You can kind of take a look at this if you want to check it out. So I really love Codex. I think it's a really great tool. I find myself using it day to day more and more. And in particular, I find myself using the desktop app. I think it's really well designed and well suited for working on multiple different projects at once and also running multiple tasks in parallel. It's very easy to do multitasking within the Codex app in a way that I struggle to do using the CLI. Even though I'm very confident in the terminal and very confident with CLIs, I just find the desktop app a better experience overall. So if you enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference. All of the resources, as I've said, will be linked in the description below for free, so you can get access to those. If you do have any comments, if I missed anything, or if you have any recommendations, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your opinions between Claude Code and Codex and some of the latest coding agents. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.